Hello, and thank you for viewing Improving IEP Teams, working within the IDEA IEP Team Framework. This is a re-recording of a webinar presented by Peak Parent Center in March of 2021. My name is Ann Wilson, and I work on the Alternative Dispute Resolution Project at Peak Parent Center, which is a collaboration with the Colorado Department of Education. The purpose of the project is to improve communication and collaboration among IEP team members in order to resolve disagreements earlier in the process and prevent conflict. We do acknowledge that conflicts may arise that require using the dispute resolution processes under IDEA, and those are available if needed. Peak Parent Center is a parent training and information center. We provide parent training information and resources such as this webinar. We are not a legal services agency, and we do not provide any legal advice, services, or representation. Today's webinar talks about the IDEA. However, this is for informational purposes only. The mission of CDE's alternative dispute resolution process is to provide a funded support system and toolbox of options for all special education stakeholders in order to make the IEP process more collaborative and improve relationships among team members. The ADR project is an optional project. There's no requirement for it under IDEA. And so it varies how states, if states offer facilitation, and how they go about it. And in Colorado, in addition to having facilitation, which I'll talk about, we also have training such as this so that anyone involved in the process can learn more about the facilitation option, as well as the skills and tools that are used in facilitation. Before we jump in, I want to just think about what is the focus of IDEA and the IEP team. And we know IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is the law under which eligible students with disabilities receive special education and related services. And so our focus in the IEP meetings, as well as in the IEP process generally, is the students. And that can be helpful to keep in mind when we enter IEP meetings. Our key themes today, I'll talk a little bit about special education facilitation as well as telefacilitation. I'll talk a little bit about the history and purpose of IDEA, then the rights of parents and meaningful participation, and review some IEP team basics. Facilitation is a service that's been offered by the Department of Education since 2017. There are facilitators available for IEP meetings. They are impartial facilitators, meaning that they don't represent either side or any party at the table. Their role is to support process, and so they don't have an interest or a role in the content of the IEP. They really are there to promote effective communication and participation by all, and that can help team members to really focus on developing the best plan of supports. They're available for IEP and other special education meetings. It's a voluntary process, and it's also free, but it must be agreed to by both parties. And we find whether a facilitator is used or not, knowing about facilitative skills can make IEP meetings more effective. It's still a relatively new process, and so we like to review what facilitation is not. It is not an advocate representing one side or the other. If you're a parent and you want to have someone really look at your IEP with you and work with you on the content and represent you in the meeting, that would be an advocate. It could also be a lawyer, and that's someone who's representing your interests. A facilitator is not a mediator, and it does not result in confidential mediated agreements. There are similarities in that facilitators and mediators are both impartial. And facilitation is not a formal legal process, such as due process. And there is no third party saying which side wins or loses. There's no judge or hearing officer. The facilitator does not have that type of role. The facilitator, the goal of the facilitation is to really complete the objective of the meeting, typically completing the IEP. It keeps the control of the outcome in the hands of the IEP team rather than putting it in the hands of another party. So it can be really helpful to be aware of the history and purpose of IDEA. Sometimes we get involved in IEP team meetings and we're really looking at the details of the IEP and kind of forget the bigger picture. So we're just going to do a quick review. So it wasn't until the 1960s that the idea of widespread education of students with disabilities came about. And what's now known as IDEA was first passed in 1975 as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And that law provided for access to education and due process. So really in the early days, it was about getting into the schools and access. And so over time, there's been development of the idea of FAPE in the LRE, which stands for Free Appropriate Public Education in the Least Restrictive Environment. And then kind of increasing emphasis on accountability and then looking at results. The purpose of IDEA stated in the law recognizes that disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. So really the purpose is broad, and if you look at how they talk about it, it's not just having people in school to go to school. We're really looking at ensuring that people have good outcomes and can go on to live a life with full participation. So something you'll hear a lot about is FAPE, which stands for free, meaning at the government expense, no cost to families. Appropriate, and that's kind of how how FAPE is delivered to meet the students' unique needs. Public, it's supervised by the public school and often takes place in the public school, though that is not necessarily the case. And then the education part is under IDEA, you're receiving special education and related services. The other concept you'll hear about is the LRE, or least restrictive environment. IDEA has a strong preference. It's not a mandate, but there is a strong preference to educate children with disabilities in regular classes alongside their peers without disabilities. The words "to the maximum extent appropriate" appear in the regulations a lot. And specifically, that's to be educated with children who are non-disabled. Also to participate in extracurricular activities with children who are non-disabled, and there may be supplementary aids and services to make this possible. Note that it's easy to confuse placement in the LRE with the location where services are delivered. However, those terms are not interchangeable. I want to just jump back. I also want to mention that the concept of FAPE was reviewed by the US Supreme Court in 2017. You may have heard of the case. It came out of Colorado. It's called Andrew F. And the Supreme Court reviewed the standard of FAPE, and the 10th Circuit, of which Colorado is part, they were applying a standard of a program that provided merely more than de minimis progress. And they were saying that was enough, but the Supreme Court rejected that standard in 2017, and they provided the language that the IDEA requires an educational program reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances, and that educational program must be appropriately ambitious in light of his circumstances. And so you might hear some of that language, appropriately ambitious, or reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress when you're looking at the standard for FAPE. So FAPE in the LRE, again, is a key concept under IDEA. And it's important to keep in mind that the purpose of special education is to allow students, eligible students with disabilities, to access the general curriculum. We often start to think about general education and special education as two separate things. So I like this diagram because it has general curriculum at the center, and then special education supports the general curriculum, and related services wrap around and support special education. Just something to be aware of is you may hear people talk about full funding, and IDEA, which was last reauthorized in 2004, has never been fully funded. Under IDEA, it authorizes the federal government to fund up to 40% of the excess cost of providing special education and related services. In recent years, federal funding has been less than 15%. And sometimes there's legislation looking for full funding. Nothing like that has been passed yet, but it's something to kind of keep your ears open for. So IEP Team Basics. We at the ADR project like to emphasize a focus on relationships. The law can be complicated, the process can be overwhelming, and people can feel frustrated with the way things work. And so in light of all that, we're still better together, and the more we can work together, the better the results for the students. Some benefits of the team approach. The IEP creates an opportunity for all the members of the team, including teachers, parents, school administrators, related service providers, and students, to work together to improve educational results for children with disabilities. And we know that strong school-family partnerships lead to better educational outcomes for students. And oftentimes we're dealing with some complex problems, and complex problems are better solved by teams, and every person at the table can bring in helpful information and offer a different perspective. And by coming together, everyone has different information and experiences with the student, and working through all that can help develop the best plan of supports. The IEP team has some mandatory members and some optional members, and we'll look at this in a little more detail, but the number varies, and these are roles that must be represented. So a person could fill more than one role, but typically it includes the parents, a district representative, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, and evaluation personnel. It may also include the student, which can be really helpful and have benefits for the student, as well as help prevent conflict, because oftentimes people don't want to disagree as much when the student's in the room. In some districts, they're using student-led IEPs, and that's a very promising practice for students to develop more agency and develop self-advocacy skills. And so the more the student can be involved in the meeting, from whatever age, that can really help the student develop agency and independence about their education. The other optional members are people with knowledge or expertise about the student. And when the time comes for transition planning in Colorado, that begins at age 15, but no later than the end of 9th grade, transition service agency representatives may be invited. So we'll just look a little more detail in what the law and regulations say. The parents of the child, and that means the parent is always invited. Not less than one regular education teacher of the child if the child is or may be participating in the regular education environment. So that would be someone who has taught the child or will be teaching the child. Not less than one special education teacher of the child, or where appropriate, not less than one special education provider of the child. And that means a special education teacher, unless the child has only a special education provider. There may be circumstances where someone only has a speech language provider or something like that. Next, we have a representative of the public agency, and that would be the district. And the representative is someone who can provide or supervise special education and commit the resources of the school. And that's a really important point, because you don't want to have the meeting and come up with an IEP and then have someone go, oh no, we can't do that. And so that's why that person is a mandatory member, to make sure that you have someone who can say, yes, we can commit the resources to carry out this IEP. An individual who can interpret the instruction implication of evaluation results. So that's someone who can help the team in determining what the appropriate special education and supports are, considering the evaluation results. That does not have to be the person who conducted the assessment. And that can vary depending on what assessments are done as well. Attendance at a meeting. The annual IEP must be developed by a properly constituted IEP team. And that means that every role is represented. Again, one person can fill multiple roles, but you want to make sure all the roles are represented. There are rules about excusing members of the IEP team from meetings. And parent consent is required to excuse a team member from attending the meeting. As a parent, you may have a situation where you'll be asked to sign a consent. And sometimes this comes at, we all have things come up unexpectedly. And so sometimes someone has to cancel at the last minute, but you do want to be thoughtful and think about, can we get the information we need from this person? Are we sure they're going to commit to the plan? So if you feel like you can't develop the IEP and you really need their presence there, then you may want to delay the meeting. So, think about whether to consent or not, and whether you can get the necessary information. So the rights of parents to meaningful participation is part of IDEA. Under IDEA, the parents have some key rights, and you can find more information about this. If you've been to an IEP meeting already, you've received an explanation of your procedural safeguards, and it's a long document, and some people find it overwhelming. A lot of people sort of, they have it, but they haven't necessarily studied, but you are entitled to that explanation of procedural safeguards and should be given that at the meeting. Some other key rights: confidentiality and access to records, but be aware of at age 18, the student reaches the age of majority, which will change the right of the parents, because the student is now an adult, so you may need to have some forms signed. The right to participate in meetings, including IEP meetings. And that's what we're mainly talking about. Parents also have a right to an independent educational evaluation if they disagree with the evaluation that was done. So this isn't just a general right. This is, you have to disagree, and then you can have one independent educational evaluation. And then there's prior written notice, which is the right to receive prior written notice on matters relating to the identification, evaluation, or placement of your child, and the provision of FAPE to the child. And so if there's sort of an addition, a change, or a denial of service, you should receive prior written notice. If you're in an IEP meeting and you've asked for something and that has been denied, you want to make sure that's noted in the prior written notice section at the end of the IEP. Parents have the right to informed consent to certain actions, including evaluation, initial provision of special education and related services, and the invitation of representatives of other agencies to participate in transition meetings. Parents have the right to disagree. The team does come together to develop the IEP, but if they aren't able to agree on an IEP, it is the school district's obligation to propose the IEP, but parents have a right to disagree with that. And there are the dispute resolution processes provided under IDEA, including mediation, state complaint, and due process. And you can find more information about those processes on the CDE website, Colorado Department of Education website. The role of parents: again, parents have an important role in special education. They are equal participants in team processes. They are team members. they're also the protector of the student's rights under IDEA. Again, as I mentioned, the school does have the legal obligation to propose an IEP that provides a free, appropriate public education, but parents have the right to object to the proposal. And our hope with using facilitation and such is that the team will reach consensus on the IEP. Again, meaningful participation is required under IDEA. IDEA requires that parents be provided an opportunity to be meaningful participants in the education of their eligible children, which includes participation in the IEP meetings. Other than the law, why focus on parent participation? Well, parents are vital to the IEP process. We know that parent, family school collaboration really improves outcomes. And so that collaboration is really important to achieving the best outcomes we can for students. It also prevents misunderstanding, conflict, and disputes. And those kind of things can take a lot of time and energy that we'd like to see devoted to the students. Collaboration strengthens the relationships, and the special education process is ongoing, and the better we have relationships, the better it will go. And again, it's better outcomes for students. Some things on what meaningful participation might look like in the meetings. One of the things also, parents are required to get a notice of a meeting. But in addition to the notice of a meeting, it's helpful to get a draft of the IEP in advance so you can look at it and know what you're going to be talking about. And if there are other, copies of the evaluation reports, things that you will need, that you might need time to process, it's nice to get those in advance so that you have a better opportunity to participate in the meeting and you can make sure your questions get answered. Including parents in the development of the agenda for the meetings. Oftentimes the meeting will sort of just follow the IEP, but it's helpful to get parent participation in developing the agenda, seeing what concerns they have, what they want to make sure is talked about. And also there's a parent input section in the IEP. And it's nice to get that prior to the meeting. Anytime you can give people more time to sort of think about things and process and prepare, that really can save time in the meeting and also give people a better chance for participation. Oftentimes, there will also be some time after the meeting to process too, which is really helpful. And then you want to make sure that parents have the opportunity to report their information during the IEP meeting. I mentioned parent input to the IEP, and that is a section of the IEP, but sometimes people don't necessarily prepare that input ahead of time, but it's really helpful to be thoughtful about that input. The ADR project uses this parent input to the IEP form. This is actually a fillable PDF. If you would like to get a copy, you can email me. It's awilson@peakparent.org. You could probably also contact Mary Ann Fleury at the Department of Education, and her information will be at the end of the webinar. But remember that parents do have a right to provide input. If you're a parent, kind of keep track of what you're seeing. I sometimes kind of, we get really busy during the year and we're not necessarily keeping track of things. So a lot of times when I go to a meeting, what's at the kind of the forefront of my mind is what I report on. So if you can keep track of things as they occur and kind of keep track of your observations, you are likely to be able to provide better input. This is the FAPE continuum, and this is a visual that the facilitators may use in a meeting. They actually have blown up ones and they may have them posted, but it's a good visual for parents as well, especially if you're in a virtual meeting, to kind of keep track of where you are in the meeting. And this sort of goes through the sections of the IEP as in the order that you're likely to discuss them. And the facilitators may actually use them for charting. But if you're a parent and you're kind of wondering, when are we going to talk about this? You can look at this and go, oh, accommodations and modifications are coming up in services in the LRE. And also, if you'd like a copy of this, you can also email as well. So just to remember to promote effective communication, that many different perspectives, considerations, and views are necessary to develop the plan of the supports. And that is why the IEP team is designed to bring together those perspectives. When you're in the meeting, listen for the purpose of understanding. We often end up listening, or we think we're listening, but we kind of listen to the beginning and then we jump into thinking about what our response is. Try and listen to all of what a person says, not just part of it and thinking you know how it's going to end. Keep the focus on the needs of the child. Sometimes when conflict occurs, our focus gets to be on each other. So we want to keep it on the needs of the child. And we want to stay forward facing. And in that sense, we mean, you know, we're developing this plan of supports going forward. We want to be mindful of history and experiences that are relevant, but we don't want to get bogged down in them and have them dragging us away from our goal. There are many ways to engage with the ADR project. Taking training such as this one, we like to see all IEP team members learning more about facilitation and the skills. A lot of districts have engaged with the project, so you can find impartial facilitators in many districts in the state. Check with your special education director to find out if your district has facilitation going on. And they're the impartial statewide facilitators through CDE. If you think facilitation is something your team might like to try, perhaps you're having trouble working through some issues and you think a facilitator might be able to help you resolve that, you can go to the CDE website and search for ADR. And if you go to the ADR page, there's a red button where you request an IEP facilitator and there's a form to be filled out. The request can be made by parents or by the district or school, but both parties must agree to the facilitation. You don't have to get agreement before you request it, but it is nice to let the team know you want to try that. And then CDE or the facilitators will attain that agreement. And this process is a service offered by CDE, but they're not, they're truly impartial, like they're not representing CDE's interests either. And so they'll reach out and get agreement, and then they'll develop a mutually agreed upon agenda. Some additional resources can be found on the CDE website, on the Peak Parent Center website, and through the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education, or CADRE. And I believe their website is cadreworks.org. We've just highlighted a few resources here that you might find helpful. A Tale of Two Conversations, which kind of looks at two different conversations and how they went differently when someone expressed their issue in a different way. And then Nature versus Nurture is interesting to see how our brain responds to conflict and how that may affect us in meetings. And then they have some other resources on facilitation. We have other webinars on our website, and the statewide facilitators also have office hours. You can check the CDE website to confirm the time. I think they're Tuesdays from 4 to 6, but I know they were thinking about changing those times. And as I mentioned, this is the contact information for Mary Ann Fleury. She is the Alternative Dispute Resolution Specialist at CDE. And if you're thinking maybe facilitation is a good option for your team, but you're not sure, she would be someone to contact to talk that through with. At Peak Parent Center, we also have parent advisors who are available for one-to-one assistance. During the school year, they're available Monday through Friday, I believe, from 8:30 to 3. I think they may have reduced hours in the summer, but you can still call or email parentadvisor@peakparent.org. So thank you for viewing this webinar. And if you have questions, contact Mary Ann Fleury, or you can contact me, Ann Wilson. My email is awilson@peakparent.org. Thank you.